Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, we are going to be talking a little bit about fire safety in the woods, and we have a special guest with us tonight. Tonight, we have Paul Schnurr with us, who has lots of experience in the fire service. So instead of me listing off his credentials, why don't you chime in here, Paul, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you bring to this discussion that we're going to have here tonight.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Schnurr, and I am the Wildfire Training Officer for the province of Nova Scotia. I work for Department of Lands and Forestry, and my job, of course, is training firefighters, right from the boots on the ground up. And some of my qualifications, and the one that probably matters most tonight, I am a fire behavior specialist. And so a lot of this presentation will actually, have a fair bit about fire behavior. And, I hope I kind of talk about some of that, you'll sort of understand why we have the regulation and stuff that we do, and, how to kind of keep yourself safe in the woods and have a safe fire. So thanks for having me.
And thank you for coming on. I know I introduced you guys a little bit there at the start there, but so everybody else out there knows, Ben, you've never actually met Paul before. I don't think you guys have ever crossed paths, have you?
Not I'm aware of. I've been up to Shoeby, so just a chance that we've met, but I don't remember.
Oh, yes. I forgot you and I had that conversation before. So a little bit of backstory. The way I wrote Paul into this is he actually moonlights. Well, not moonlights. His second duty hat is he's the chief of Miramichi Fire Department as well. So he'd be my district fire chief. And I knew he had a little bit with lands and forestry there. I didn't mention it in any of our advertising because I didn't know if he was going to divulge it or not. But yeah, not only is he with the province of Nova Scotia with lands and forestry and the fire service, but you also have a number of years under your belt as well, just in the volunteer service as well. Do you not, Paul?
I do, yeah. I guess it's over 30 now, so yeah.
It's impressive.
So I'm going to assume it's safe to say that you've seen a few forest fires in your day. I do know one specifically that most people here in Nova Scotia will be aware of that you were on and helped out a little bit with there was the Porters Lake Fire of 2013, June 13th, 2013. I don't know if you were the initial boots on the ground, but I know you weren't too far behind it, were you?
No, I came in on the second day with that one, and then follow up, the Spryfield fire the year after that, and some of the larger fires within the province I get to, as well as they send me to help out in other areas as well. So wherever there seems to be major forest fires, a lot of times I get to go there. So it's a wonderful job. Yep.
And that's good. So the point why I probed you a little bit more there was for our listeners. In the past, and Ben can attest to this, we have always had the discussion about fire safety in the woods and making your fire and what counts as an open burn and stuff like that, which we'll get into a little later in the show. And we're excited to hear your opinions on this and give us some better definitions. But we also get the question asked significantly, why is there a burn ban in effect? And I know I've heard that not only on the podcast or in the Facebook groups and on YouTube and everything else, but I've heard it in person. What about you, Ben? You must get that a lot. I know just from, ABA here, I get it quite a bit as soon as they're like, oh, you're into bushcrafting, we talk about fires, and then so why do they not allow you to have campfires? You must get that quite a bit too, do you, Ben?
Yeah, you get it fairly frequently, and people, I think it's not so much they wonder why, but sometimes I guess they're just frustrated and they just want their fire because it's such a part of camping. But it's also, we get some pretty dry, hot summers here in Nova Scotia. And so I've always assumed that the risk can get quite bad. And I've seen bad forest fires myself in various places I've been. But yeah, people often ask those kind of questions and they want to know the reason and they want to know, is it safe to do this even though? And people are always looking for that exception, right?
Yeah, and I think that's human nature. We always try to look for the loopholes or gray areas. I mean, without getting into too many specifics, a lot of the woods adventuring goers or at least a good portion off them, they tend to kind of blend through that gray area. Should I be able to set up a shelter here? Should I be able to camp here? Will I get in trouble if I camp here? We do have a bit of that, and you can see that once again through the other mediums I mentioned there, just on podcasts and YouTube and stuff like that. But hopefully today, at least when it comes to fire and specific to Nova Scotia, but I think this information will be good for pretty much anywhere, will it, Paul? Like, we're going to talk about some generalities when it comes to fire safety, are we not?
Yeah. It's kind of funny when people say they go to another area to fight a fire and they say fires burn differently here, and my reaction, my comment to that is they don't actually burn differently than what they would at home, but the conditions under which they burn are different, and that's really what you have to think of. So they say last night I could have a fire, but tonight I can't. So the conditions are always sort of changing, and that's kind of the big thing to hold in the back of your mind. The other thing is it's not personal. We have to put the rules out to everybody. So a lot of times they say, but I was a firefighter for so many years, I know how to have a fire. Doesn't matter. Myself, I have to follow the same rules when it comes to campfires and stuff as well. And a lot of times we may get, frustrated people phoning up, say in some area like, say they're in Cumberland County, and so they're up in the higher areas, Foley Mountain or Wentworth, somewhere around in there, and there's snow on the ground at their place, and yet when you get down along the shore and stuff, the snow is cleared off, and the potential for fire is there. So, a lot of times I will be speaking specifically about Nova Scotia because of the regs and stuff, but the overall fire behavior stuff applies to everywhere that you go. So definitely.
And that'll be good too, because I know we chatted a little bit before we came on. We do have listeners from different parts of the globe, so don't just think because you're not here in Canada or the east coast of Canada that this isn't going to be good information for you, because like Paul just said there, a lot of the same basic principles are going to apply, and it's definitely good information regardless to keep in the back of your head. So is there any real specific spot you wanted to start in this, Ben, before we get in?
No, I guess if you really want to start with something, we could just start with how quick can things go wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question, and they can go wrong very quickly, and a lot of times people don't realize that, and you can actually Google or YouTube videos and stuff where a big thing now is like gender reveal parties in the States where they have some sort of pyrotechnics, and it's amazing how many times they wanted this to be a joyous occasion, and suddenly it set off a huge fire that they spent weeks trying to put out and stuff like that. So under the right conditions, yeah, it can go very badly quickly. And at the other times, you say, well, I always have a fire here and I've never had a problem. And that's probably true until the first time you do have a problem. And again, think about, the conditions and, what has changed from day to day, and are things now more susceptible for burning? So.
We just had a comment from our live chat there, and if you didn't know, Paul, I don't know if I told you or not, but we do have people joining us live, and they have the opportunity to post any questions or comments that they have in the section here. So one of the comments that first came up was from Steve here, and it says there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation about what constitutes as an open fire versus a fire for cooking versus a fire in an enclosure. It's hard to know all the rules, and I don't know about misinformation, but there is a lot of misunderstanding. I agree to that. And it's sometimes tricky to find this information. So being in the position you are, can you maybe recommend a good spot for people to go and check out some of this information if they want to read it on their own once this episode is over?
So the Nova Scotia government website, if you look under lands and forestry, you'll take it to the forest fire, or like the forest protection, where forest fire is part of that. And yeah, it is fair to say that there is a lot of not necessarily misinformation, but there's a lot of old information out there. And a number of years back, they talked about having fires for cooking and warmth, and they had a paper permit system where you'd pay $5 and pick up your permit, and then you were good to burn for 2 weeks and all that. And then I'm going to say 10 years back, it kind of lost the specific year, but about 10 years back, they changed the regulations, and they sort of updated, kind of the permit system. So it's no longer a paper permit system. It's one where we go on the website and we check. And now it's issued, your permit is issued daily, so to speak, in the fact that it says by county whether you can burn starting at 2:00, burn after 7, or you can't have a fire at all. So there's a lot of the old legacy information out there. So the term campfire was sort of ambiguous, and so they kind of changed it to kind of an overall domestic, what they call a domestic burning, which it also included people burning garbage, because you're not allowed to burn garbage. But if they were wanting to do land clearing and feed small piles, if they were raking up yard debris and burning stuff that they couldn't compost, that all sort of got lumped under domestic burning. And so now there really isn't a thing there where you're allowed to have a cooking fire as such anymore. Those campfires, cooking fires and stuff fall under domestic burning, and then that is permitted as to when they're allowed or not. So,
and that's a real good point there, because I still hear that one quite a bit when the subject of fire comes up. Oh, if it's a fire for heat, light, or cooking, it's always allowed. Which, as you just said in the past, perhaps not so much with the current regulations here in Nova Scotia.
No, and there was a kind of a loophole there where people would build this great big mount of wood and light it on fire on a day where really a fire shouldn't be lit, and they'd have a package of wieners there and say, oh, but it's a cooking fire. Well, you on fire on a day where really.
Sorry, I was trying to get I tried to get the messages up, but
oh, okay. I was going to say somebody has a little bit of feedback going, but we're all good. So what's your thoughts in on this, Ben? I know I kind of side railed you there for a second and cut you off.
No,
it looked like you had a comment to say there, and I kind of stepped on your toes.
No, I almost laughed because when he mentions the fire times, my wife is probably the first one that picks up on it every time, because we go to the cabin or we're out camping, and fire is a huge thing for her, and she watches the fire regulations like a hawk. And as soon she's like, I could have, if she missed it, if we could have had a fire at 2 and she missed it, she's pretty upset.
Is for us here on the East Coast, Nova Scotia, is that still novascotia.ca/NATR/BurnSmart, or is it novascotia.ca/Burns? I could just check, I suppose, instead of just guessing.
I just Googled fire Nova Scotia.
Once upon a time, I used to know this stuff.
It's burn safe, but yeah, if you Google burn safe, yeah, that'll take you to you there.
Yeah, so novascotia.ca/burn safe, or just Google burn safe Nova Scotia, and you're good. Funny enough, right now, it's a burn day. Surprise, surprise, with the rain. But that brings up another great point. Not every single time that we get rainfall It's not going to necessarily mean that it's going to be an open burn day or anything like that. And there is quite a bit of science behind this, and I know you had a little bit to go into on this, Paul. So, do you want to start in on maybe some of the science behind some of this, and we'll just kind of intervene our questions as we can?
Sure, absolutely. So let me try this sharing thing again, make sure it worked. There we are.
And for anybody watching the live videos, we are trying some new stuff here, so hopefully it all works out well. And no, that's not the one I want. This is the one I want. Okay, we're good.
Okay. Am I up there?
You are.
Yep.
You're live, sir.
Okay. I know I can see it. So, yeah. One thing I'd like to point out is that, you know, not every fire in the woods becomes those great big raging crown fires, and so we do get a lot of calls about, you know, people that they're just kind of afraid. So even on nights when you're allowed to burn, sometimes we get phone calls and people are just like, but it's really dry and it's, you know, we haven't had rain for a while, or my well is dry, and stuff like that. But I just wanted to point out again, you know, think about conditions, and it takes a lot less water to make fuels wet than what it does to, you know, refill your well during a drought. So conditions are changing every day, and that's why, you know, maybe one, you know, a no burn one night, and then the next night you can have one after you know, after 7, and then there might be a slight rainfall, and you think you can, you know, there was some rain, why can't I burn after 2? But again, maybe it wasn't enough. So when we talk about fire behavior, we kind of use this fire behavior triangle, which is a little bit different than the fire triangle of fuels, oxygen, and heat. You know, trying to figure out what a fire will do. We look at the fuel and the topography, and tonight we're going to focus a lot on the weather, because that is what really drives our fire burn safe decisions. So there's a lot of things that do actually go into the weather, but every day we will take weather readings at 1 o'clock, and we look for the temperature, the relative humidity, the precipitation, and then the wind speed and the direction. And these are the factors that really affect the drying out of fuels. The length of the day is also another one, but it's not really a measurement. You know, we can get that from a chart. So for Nova Scotia and a lot of other areas as well, but especially for Nova Scotia, wind is a huge influencer in you know, our biggest fires. Out west, you know, they get very large fires known as plume-dominated fires. They're not really affected by the wind. And when people talk about, you know, storms that make their own weather and create their own wind, those are more apt to be the plume-dominated fires, and they develop much like a thunderstorm. So for Nova Scotia, wind, and of course the direction, it you know, tells us what, you know, what's in front of it, what might be in danger if a fire does escape. But it also influences things like drying, and when you do have a fire, throwing embers and stuff out beyond your fire pit, or, you know, across the burn area. So wind is huge for us. And so, you know, I guess the first thing, part of advice, is don't burn during windy nights.
And that makes sense. I mean, referencing the Porter's Lake fire again, even in the news they were saying that was a very heavily wind-driven fire.
It was, yeah, and the wind kept up for you know, the second day as well, and so, you know, Yeah, they become very fast moving, and you know, they can do a lot of damage very quickly. And you know, when you get embers that are thrown away from the main fire, whether we're talking about your campfire or the actual forest fire itself, it you know, they may be harder to detect. So you may have already started your fire, you get an ember thrown, and you don't notice it until, you know, the fire actually grows to a bigger size, and then you know, it could be too late to kind of extinguish it. So uh, that's why it's important, you know, windy nights there.
Yeah.
So
So go ahead.
the diurnal. So every day has a pattern for the weather, and for Nova Scotia, this is actually very pronounced. Our, you know, through the nighttime, our relative humidity will climb, and relative humidity is actually in a lot of ways almost as good as a rainfall. So, you know, the dew is falling, and this will quiet the fire right down. The same thing that's happening through the nighttime is the temperature is dropping. And again, you know, lower temperatures, you know, they kind of help quiet the fire as well. And oftentimes wind dies down through the night as well. Once the morning, you know, the sun rises in the morning time, the temperature starts to climb and the relative humidity starts to drop. And so this will happen throughout the day till, you know, 5 o'clock or so, and then it starts going the other way again. But in terms of woods, you know, this risk period from about 11 o'clock till about 6 o'clock, you know, that's usually kind of when things are, you know, really kind of moving up into the more hazardous time of the day. And so as the day warms up, our risk of fire hazard starts climbing. And then, you know, it's a kind of a gradual climb, but then come 5 o'clock, you know, that's kind of what we consider the peak burn period. And then it starts dropping off, and it actually drops off quicker in most cases than what it does as it increases throughout the morning. So that's why 7 o'clock becomes the time for, you know, if we do allow burn after 7. So the risk is sort of dropped off, and we're kind of heading to a time when there is less risk. And so that's kind of the, you know, guides us to the times. So 8 o'clock in the morning, we actually want, you know, the fires out by then, just because it's you know, it's still a low hazard time of the day. You shouldn't have much problem to get it put out. And then the fires are out as the risk starts to build. And then 1 o'clock, we take the weather. And by the time we do the calculations and like all the weather comes in from our automated stations, we do the calculations and we figure out what the burn restrictions will be for the day. That takes us to about 2 o'clock. And that's why the decision is made from 8 to 2, no burning. And then the decision, you know, if there's been lots of rain or it's the low hazard, you know, we could burn after 2 or have to wait till 7 or no burn at all. So on nights that are no burn, we're either expecting that the weather will actually lower the risk enough so that it is safe to burn. And there are parts of the world where fires will actually burn as well at nighttime as they do during the day. For Nova Scotia, normally, you know, the fire just, you know, the term we use is lie down. And so, but there are nights when that doesn't happen. And Spryfield Fire was a good example of that. It burned pretty actively through the night as well. So that's what we call the diurnal or the daily fire risk. So that's the pattern, and that's what drives, you know, the timing for our burn safe.
And that's good information to know there. And just for those that are just kind of zoned in or half zoned out, something to take out of that whole discussion there on the bushcrafty side of things is for all that reasoning Paul just gave there, if you're trying to practice things like bow drill and hand drill and stuff like that, the peak burning times is actually when you're going to have the best success in doing activities like that, because you are talking about a really delicate ember and stuff like that. So for the same reasons that it's easy to get that going on, on your practicing end of stuff, is the exact same reasons that it becomes such a risk out in the woods. So.
Yeah, I can see that.
So yeah, just a little tidbit of information for those that are driving in their cars and just kind of, half listening. There's a good point to take from this. Maybe at this point, it's a good back up and listen to that whole explanation there again, because it'll explain a lot when you actually think about it. Anyway, sorry, Paul. Continue on, sir.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And actually, I'm going to reference building a fire and a slide a little bit later here, but definitely. So there's another phenomenon known as crossover, and this does happen in Nova Scotia, and something to kind of keep in mind. And so this is something that happens when the temperature in degrees Celsius is higher than the relative humidity. So for an example here, 30 Celsius and 20% relative humidity. And on this chart, we can just kind of back it up there. So this yellow line, if we were to graph it out, the yellow line actually drops below the white line. So anybody who's a firefighter out there, when you identify this crossover period, this is the time when fire activity is more extreme, and where that has an effect on users of out enjoying the wilderness and stuff like that, and having a fire, is they may be kind of deceived a little bit, because it could be a cold day. It could be 10 degrees, a cooler day. But if the relative humidity is, 7%, the chances of, more extreme fire behavior are going to happen. So it's not just the hot days that could potentially be a higher fire potential. It happens on the cooler days as well. So we have a number of these, especially in the springtime. Once we kind of get into July, August, they still happen, but they're not as frequent. Our whole weather patterns are changing a little bit with the jet stream. So springtime, it happens fairly often. So crossover, and then also too, the not every throughout the year. And so when I'm saying that, wintertime, snow on the ground, or certainly a lot of precipitation. As we move into spring, the woods is wet, or certainly it should be wet. It doesn't necessarily happen everywhere in Canada, but it should be very wet. And the fuel's very, very damp. And so if you picked up large pieces of wood and tried to burn them, you'd probably have a harder time doing it. But the thing is, when we talk about fuels, we'll make a little distinction there between fine fuels and then medium fuels and large diameter or heavy fuels. So in the springtime, these fine fuels, they'll dry out very quickly. And so if a fire were to happen, usually it spreads very rapidly, but then when nighttime comes and the humidity climbs up, these fine fuels react to that increase in the humidity, and the fire kind of goes out. And when we say there's a little mop-up effort, really the only stuff that's available, to burn was actually put out because of the higher humidity. And that's why we kind of say high humidity is almost as good as a rain. So these are kind of one, and a big thing to remember when we talk about these fine fuels, they're leaves, needles, grass, very small twigs. And so on average, it takes about 9 to 18 hours for them to dry out. But dead grass, will dry out in as little as 4 hours. So for firefighters, there could be a rain in the morning, and then suddenly the sun comes out and they're fighting grass fires in the afternoon. So again, don't just take that, it rained, I should be safe for a few days, especially in the springtime, because these fine fuels dry out very, very quickly, especially grass. And then, choosing a place where you're camping, that's why it's important to clear all of these fine fuels, away from where you're going to have your campfire pit. Make sure you get down to, bare mineral soil or rock, and that will help decrease the risk of an escape fire.
So just to clarify there, Paul, for once again, people that are listening kind of half zoned out, the best way to make a campfire is to clear away the fine fuel, the best way to make a campfire so it's safe is to clear away those fine fuels and get down to bare mineral soil and rock. Just correct?
Correct. Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. And so when I say the mineral soil, like that's, the dirt that's actually made up of, eroded rock and stuff like that. Anything that's organic in that, has the potential to dry out and burn. And we'll talk a little bit more about duff in a little bit. So as the spring progresses, other fuels start to dry out. And then the medium-sized fuels takes about 18 days for those to dry out. The very large diameter stuff, they talk about 52 days for that stuff to dry out. And the difference with all that is, like, large diameter stuff takes a long time to dry out, but it also takes a lot of rain to make it wet again. And so, it takes a minimum of about, say 3 millimeters for easy numbers to actually, just start to have a dent on making it wet. And of course, more rain, the better. And once it's wet, it takes a long time to dry out. The fine fuels, takes a little amount of moisture, but, it dries out very quickly. So summertime, we start getting into those droughts. And as more stuff dries out and becomes available, now we're talking about, hotter fires and, potentially rapid rates of spread. And it's also, you're no longer looking at, fighting the fire till dark and then, humidity takes over. You're there day after day and potentially week after week or month after month to try and extinguish some of these fires. So that, gets into that summertime drought. And then as we move to autumn, for Nova Scotia, we could have, a couple of hurricanes come through and that will put an end to the fire season, or we can go into autumn with a prolonged level of drought as well. And so if that happens, then we still have like the summer type fires where they're hard to put out, higher intensities, but, leaves start falling, grasses start dying off and curing. And so we're back to a higher level of the fine fuels that are available to burn as well. So we kind of get this mix of summer and spring in autumn time. And so, potentially autumn it can be quite a busy time as well. And again, people think, the summer's over. We don't have the heat. I should be safe to burn at any time. And that's not necessarily true. So, there is a seasonal effect that happens with things.
And that's good to know too, just coming back to the bushcrafting side of things. If you, for all the same reasons that a fire can get away, It may make it difficult to get a fire going, or it may be real easy to get a fire going. So, for any of our listeners that are listening on audio only, this is one of those episodes I am going to strongly recommend that if you have the time to jump back and watch the video side of this things. If you are interested in checking this out, there's a lot of good information Paul's putting up in a few slides there. It's just YouTube, Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures, and episode 120, and you'll catch all this stuff.
Thanks, Robert.
Slope. Yep.
So,
What was that, Ben?
Oh, I'm just reading the next slide here.
Oh.
okay. So, slope has an effect on forest fires as well. So much in your, to have your campfire and stuff like that. But generally, fire runs faster uphill than it does downhill. And if you doubt me, light a match and hold it upside down and tell me how that worked out for you. But there are times when, the slope is working against the wind, and so fire can be pushed by the wind actually faster down. It's not necessarily a given, but a lot of times, definitely it'll run faster up the hill. So if you are, out enjoying the woods and you are caught in a fire, that potentially is something for you to think about. The fire will likely go faster up the hill than what it does down the hill. But something that does actually play into it a little bit, especially when you're choosing a campsite and stuff, but it is important for forest fires as well, is aspect. And when I talk about aspect, it really, if you picture yourself sitting on a hill, what way are you facing? If you're facing south, then it's a south aspect. If you're facing east, while you're sitting on the hill, you're facing east, that's an east aspect. And so, if you're choosing a campsite, generally the warmest, driest slope is actually the south, because it kind of gets the sun all throughout the day. The next warmest is the west, and by extension, the second driest, and that's because you get the sun at you're getting the sun at the strongest part of the day, and so the east gets the same amount as the west, but it's getting the sun at a when it's just starting to rise and the day's not as hot, and then usually the north slope is generally considered the wettest. And if you're out enjoying the woods in the springtime, you'll notice, hills, the south face aspect will be clear of snow, but you go to the other side and potentially you'll find, some drifts and stuff still back there. So again, choosing a campsite, important, but it also does have an effect on forest fires.
And just for anybody listening from outside Canada again, keep in mind that is, we're talking Nova Scotia here. If you're in the northeast side, if you were in the southwest or below the south of the hemisphere, just take that into account, because we do have some people from Australia and places like that. But yeah, anyway, sorry, Paul, go ahead. Hey, Troy, how's it going? Troy just joined us, by the way, Paul. If you didn't see him pop up in the comments there.
Hi, Troy. Yeah, I was I had the good fortune of being able to go out and help with the Australia bushfires. Well, I guess it's kind of, I don't even know what to say, two of their summers ago now. And yeah, that really kind of screwed me up. The sun was in the north, and I never really realized how instinctively I followed the sun for getting directions until I was in Australia, and I was totally messed up. So, anyway, when it comes to the fuels, a lot of times we're talking about dead fuels especially, but the living fuels are available to burn as well. And things that sort of affect a forest fire, and whether a fire will get started in the first place, and then how it'll grow and how hot it'll be, and stuff like that. excuse me. Um, you know, basically the list is this as a building your campfire. The fuel size, the fuel arrangement, the volume of fuel, fuel types, fuel condition, fuel moisture, and the chemical content. So really the same factors that go into building a good campfire also kind of go into the fire risk of an area as well. And so here is a slide on, when we talk about the fine fuels and then the more coarse, larger diameter fuels and such. So if we look at this grass field, if you drop a match into that, you have a very high percentage chance of it actually starting a fire and, it taking off and running. And these fuels, they dry out quickly. They respond to little changes. So a gust of wind will fire, just turn into something else. And even momentarily, when the wind dies down again, it'll start slowing down as well. If you contrast that to the other side, this larger debris and stuff, it takes a lot more energy to get that going. And then when it does, it'll burn for a long time. But if the fire actually burns through here quickly and, it doesn't have the amount of time to kind of catch that, it'll burn off the fine fuels and then the fire will be done. So the size is very important. And so when we talk about fine fuels, very important for the speed of the fire and how easy it will ignite. So take a quick scan around for, the area where you're having fires. If you're seeing dead grass, it's not a good area because that will take the smallest ember and most often, it'll ignite and start running. Once the grass turns green, it's a different story. That actually starts to become a barrier to fire. So the green grass just won't hold the fire in the same way. And if you think about, if you just lit a fire on your yard, say, in a nice green watered lawn or whatever, the grass around the fire itself will burn. But, once it gets so far away from the fire and it's no longer getting enough heat, it'll still be green grass. So same thing sort of happens. And this is why spring we get a lot of, these fast moving out of control fires. And a lot of it has to do with grass. And then when we put on top of that, the number of people that believe that, burning off their field and stuff does a lot of good. It keeps fire departments busy. So avoid, areas with a lot of these fine fuels.
So basically, don't set your fire at the same place you're taking your tinder bundle from.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And when we talk about loopholes and stuff, if you have a fire and you're more than 1,000 feet away from the woods, legally you can have that fire, but really there's not a lot of places in Nova Scotia that that you're 1,000 feet away from the woods, but you don't have some sort of other hazard. And so even if you had a large field in behind your house, you might be 1,000 feet away from the woods. But then what is around you? And a lot of times in the springtime, that's dead grass all around you. So it's probably still not a good place to have a fire anyhow, even though legally you could have one. But, summertime, nice green grass, it'd actually be a safe place to have the fire. So important to kind of look at the different fuels around. So the fine fuels include, grass, leaves, moss, all that stuff.
Was there something you wanted to say there,
a fire going?
I have the advantage I can see everybody's face. I know you can't there, Paul. So were you trying to say something there, Ben?
I'm always surprised every spring how many people I see trying to clear their yard with a fire. and how, like, how easy to me it could get out of control. Because I remember a few years ago where my kids were the next door neighbor at their sitters decided to clean this field between the two properties by just lighting it on fire. It was all grass, and I mean, he was out there with the hose, but it just doesn't feel safe to me. Like, that's good breeze comes up. The next thing you know, that's out of control, and your little garden hose seems pretty inadequate at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. People very quickly find out how far their hose will go, and a lot of times it's not enough. And they don't really respect how how little it takes for like you say, that gust of wind, it's gone again. And a lot of yard debris can be composted, and you know uh, the other stuff, maybe larger, that you don't want to compost, and that's great material that for campfires, when you're legally allowed to have a campfire. Absolutely, use it. But yeah, it's amazing how much people just want to burn that, and they want to get the yard times when they're not allowed to actually burn it. And we'll talk about another phenomenon that kind of happens around the May long weekend, that people are now opening up the cottages and starting to have a little fire to kind of clear up the property. And so there's another phenomenon that kind of happens, and we'll talk about that very shortly. So a lot of we talk about fuels being in different parts, and I don't want to get into this too much, but when you're thinking about, I want to build a fire in this area, think about it as a 3D, three-dimensional thing. So, the fire pit is along the surface, absolutely, but think about what's going down underneath as well, because there could be roots hidden underneath there, and they could, go to, join up with another tree. And especially during the drought of the summertime, as fire and heat may ignite these, and that may not pop up until a number of days later, maybe even a week later. So again, scrape it down to mineral soil, and if you see roots, dig them up as well. And so there's also an organic layer, the duff layer, and I'm sure everybody's heard of that. And that's like the leaves and needles and stuff that are breaking down. So that holds fire very, very well, and it's a good thing for holding lightning strikes as well. So when it dries up, it'll hold fire. The other thing is, think about what's around you and above you, and this is part of the whole 3D thing, because potentially you have embers and stuff thrown up into the live crown, and there could be dead stubs that are catching the radiant heat and igniting. And again, it may not be something that pops up immediately. It may be a day or two later that suddenly this tree starts throwing embers and stuff because it's kind of come to life with a fire. And then another thing that's important to firefighters, and think about it, is what we call ladder fuels. So is there actually something that will carry kind of like a ramp, a fire that's on the surface, and then it kind of catches smaller brush into larger trees. And so when this is existing in the area, you need to really be careful, because this has potential for generating those those larger crown fires. And in around your property, you can really reduce your fire risk just by pruning them up a little bit off the ground, and maybe clearing out some of this other brush that's around, so you no longer have that ladder fuel. It goes a long way to protecting your property. And so the ladder fuels we talk about, it's not necessarily small brush feeding into taller stuff. the actual trees themselves may actually be the ladder fuel. And black spruce is, a species that is really prone to this because they have branches that go all the way down to the ground. So fire moving along the surface, it's up into the crowns in no time. And this is, typical boreal forest, as well as a lot of the forest here in Nova Scotia as well. You get these ladder fuels. And this is kind of a few slides on how the ladder fuels work. Starts in the brush pile and then moves up and carries up into the crown. And next thing you know, it's burning off whole trees. And so if it's kind of individual like this, we call it torching. And then as it starts to burn the whole stand, then we refer to that as crowning.
So something important to take out of this for people that are looking to make their own campfires is, and I've seen pictures of it on Facebook, and I know we've all been guilty for it for a little bit, don't build your fire necessarily directly under a tree. Heat travels up, convection column, that could ignite the tree above you and or the limbs above you. And if it's dry enough, you could potentially get into a little bit of trouble there. So like Paul said a few slides back there, that's that kind of 3D look around. Just be real sure about where you put that, not only getting down to the soils and stuff. Once again, referencing what you said there, Paul, but, looking up and making sure you're not building a fire directly under something that could ignite above it.
Yeah, good point. So, I'll wait for that slide to catch up there. So for Nova Scotia, softwoods, the conifers are really the tree that carries the fire most for us. And so, this is kind of the more critical for fires within Nova Scotia. You more often crown fires and such. So, pretty much across Canada, softwood is the big, the big one for fire. When you get into areas like Arizona, Southern California, stuff like that, you get into a lot of desert plants that are oily and waxy, and there's another thing going on, and they burn even more vigorously because they're adapted to a desert, and they have these waxes and oils and stuff. We don't often have those plants here in Canada, although potentially they are around people's homes because they have like rhododendron is a fairly waxy plant that may help carry fire in around a home. So conifer is the big one for us. It burns hot, it burns fast. The deciduous forest, the hardwoods, this is kind of a seasonal one because in the springtime, you don't have all the leaves out, you don't have all the green underbrush and stuff. So the leaves are there, they're available to burn, but they're not usually hot. They may be a little bit smoky because of lots of water being burnt off there, going up with the smoke. But once this greens up, this actually becomes sort of a barrier to fire spread as well. So again, look around at your forest, the time of year, and this may not be too bad a place to, not necessarily right there, there's lots of stuff there to burn, but in around a hardwood forest is usually a less chance of a fire escaping from you. And if it does, it's usually a lower intensity. Mixed wood, you kind of get the characteristics of both. More softwood that's in it, kind of the more intense the fire will be. And grass, we talked about that one. That's fuel for Nova Scotia in the springtime, as well as out in the prairies. Even out in the mountainous areas, they have a lot of treed land, but there's a kind of a grassy component on the forest floor. So it's out there, but these fires burn hot and they burn very fast. in areas around clear cuts, there's a lot of material there to burn. These don't generate huge crown fires because there's really no trees to have a crown to support it. But these areas are deceptive, and so a lot of times, you'll see people burning or having a campfire on like an old woods road, where the truck turnaround is and stuff like that. And these areas will hold little embers and stuff for a long time. If you don't extinguish your fire properly, just a few embers, and this is off and running with lots of fuel to burn. So it does get very hot.
Those areas dry out really quick too, don't they?
They do, yeah. They're getting like full sun all the time. Yeah, there's
and they're open
they
to
dry
the
out, and man, they're open to the wind. Yep, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So these fuel, these areas, these bogs, they also are deceptive fuel, because you might think this is a wet area. No problem. It's really wet around here. I should be safe for the fire. But the thing is, no matter how wet the soil is in around the area, the vegetation in these bogs will burn, and it'll burn very hot and very fast, especially in the springtime. But even in the summertime, they'll support fire as well. And so, we have some areas in Nova Scotia where, people like to light these for whatever reason. They think they're not really damaging a forest or anything like that. And but very quickly they take off, and then they're hitting a stand and doing damage to other areas. Yeah. So this phenomenon that we call the spring dip, that we kind of talked a little bit about earlier. So for Nova Scotia, that's right at the end of May, just kind of right getting to the long weekend in May, and this is where more people are opening up the cottage, cleaning up their yards. A lot more fishermen are out there. Fishing seasons have opened. And so there's a lot more activity going on in the woods. But with this spring dip, this is actually the time when the trees are have the least amount of moisture inside the live needles. So a tree takes all the moisture it can from the existing needles and pushes it to the new growth to help that grow. And so it makes the trees really dry. And you'll notice, for Nova Scotia, our largest fires are kind of happening end of May, beginning of June, when we're into this spring dip. And so something to keep in the back of your mind. And then this is affecting the conifer trees, not the deciduous trees. But, again, lots of people in the woods at a critical time for the woods. And so you'll find trees that, may have resisted fire a little bit before. Suddenly, it doesn't take much to ignite them.
And this is good information for people out there as well, making fires, as you said. That's also around the time when people are starting to head back into the woods and camp in our line of stuff, too, because generally the snow's gone enough that we can get back, those that don't do winter camping, like Ben, out there freezing. But no, those that are like fair weather campers, it's generally the time when people start going out, like that May 2-4 weekend. You go out, you get into the woods, get a few adult beverages into you, and of course, bonfire comes to mind, but that's probably the worst time of year to actually have it.
Yeah. And you're still like a lot of dead grass in the area. Things haven't hit green up yet, which you get all the herbaceous vegetation coming out where it's nice and green, which kind of helps slow down a fire. But you also still have like weather patterns where low humidity and potentially high temperatures, higher winds, and sometimes the end of May, we can get some dry Mays as well. So May can be a very critical time, and again, it's a deceiving thing because they say, well, not that long ago there was snow, but again, things will dry out quicker than what people think possible. So, so just kind of looking at this site and this picture, and you can see in behind, the forest is burnt in behind there. But I just wanted to point out a few things, like, this fire pit is there, rocks around it to keep embers from, rolling away from your main fire. Good mineral soil in around there. I know there's a few things around, but it's scraped clear. There's not a lot of not a lot of vegetation to carry a fire over and such. When they put the fire out, they kind of pulled things away from the fire so that even if they didn't get some of this bigger stuff out, they weren't meeting up against each other and sort of feeding off each other. It probably would have been better if they, left things like totally within the pit, whatever was burnt. But douse it, stir it up, and the thing about this, you say, well, it couldn't be that great because it started a forest fire. But the thing is, this didn't start that forest fire, but it is a good picture for for presentations. So just by having a few small things in place and considering your the hazards, the conditions for that day, you don't need a whole bare gravel pit or something like that to be fire safe. Just by again thinking of that things in a 3D way, that you can make things fairly safe to have a fire, and of course follow the regulations. That's a good thing. So we're almost done here. I don't know what time you're going to give me the hook here, but
We'll
if
run
you
as
go
long as we
to
need
our
you, Paul.
okay, right on. So if you go to the Nova Scotia government website, and other provinces have similar things. Now this is a Canadian system, so you may not see it in the States. There are a few states that actually do use the Canadian system, especially like the Great Lakes states and Alaska and such. But they also have a different fire rating system. So ours is kind of numerical, and so this may not apply to American listeners. But Australia uses they have their own system as well. But the Canadian system is used down there as well. So potentially you may see it down there, and other countries have come by and been trained in it and starting to use the system that we have. So if you go on there, you'll get a daily forecast of what the fire hazard is. Right now there isn't a map, but it is being updated, and we're going to be using another mapping product. So that's not too far in the future. So you will be able to see where it is, what the weather the fire hazard for your area is. So we do have every day 1 o'clock the weather comes in. We get all these numbers for the weather readings, and then we start getting all these other numbers. So the fine fuel moisture code, that's a good one for how easy will a fire start. So once you see it getting up into like 88, 89 or higher, it's very easy to start a fire and start to get some getting into the more extreme fire behavior. An interesting one, this DMC, which stands for Duff Moisture Code. Once they start getting above 20, especially when they start getting around 30 or higher, if there's lightning storms that come through the area, the areas that are above 30, they have a very high chance of actually getting lightning holdovers as well. So, and then, the big significant number that everybody kind of talks about is the FWI, the Fire Weather Index. And this is what we base, the overall fire hazard on. So when they talk about, it's an extreme fire hazard day and stuff like that, that's based on this FWI number. So blue is low, green is moderate, yellow high, orange very high, and then they get to extreme. So so you can go on, you can see that. You can also see what's expected for the next day. And unfortunately, we're only 24 hours ahead in terms of the forecast. So if you're planning on camping for a week, you can't necessarily get an overall forecast. But you can pretty well guess that if you're into high to very high, and you're not getting rain, it's going to continue much along the same lines. So just to kind of close out, and then maybe I can look at the burn safe for just a moment as well. But for Nova Scotia, if you wish to report a forest fire, you can dial 911, or we do have a toll-free number, 1-866-565-2224. And then reporting illegal burning, there may be somebody burning when they're not allowed to burn and stuff like that. And when people share our burn safe posts on like Facebook and stuff like that, sometimes they put in, their own message on it that if they see illegal burning to call 911. And that's really not what 911 is for. So if the fire is escaped, certainly call 911. Feel free to do that. But 911 wasn't designed to handle the flow of all the illegal burning and stuff like that as well. So if you wish to report it, use our toll-free number, and it's staffed 24 hours a day, and so you'll get a hold of somebody and you can report that. So that's kind of that. So any questions come up there, Robert?
Not too many. Not too many. Just a bunch of people, a few comments come out of that, and some information came into that. If anybody does have questions, like that was a lot of information to take in, I know, but I'm sure that, like I said, a good majority of our listeners, they listen to this on their commutes to and from work and stuff like that. There could be an influx of questions come in after the fact. Is that something we can direct your way, Paul? And maybe we can have an updating episode later on to answer some of those questions if they do arise?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So
sorry. Go ahead, Ben. Ben was just about to say
I was
something.
going to ask a question there related to what do you do when you can't get hold to this site? So a lot of us are backwoods camping. We're doing it for 2, 3, 4 days at a time. Obviously, we're going to check before we leave, but some places our cell phones just aren't getting signal. A lot of us, I don't usually carry a radio, try and listen to this, and it's not always coming on. Even if I did, limited batteries. Like, should we always assume that there is no burn, or just take extra precaution and be super careful and make an assumption?
Yeah, all the sayings about assumptions.
Yeah.
The thing is, you're really not released from the law just because you are, out of battery power or out of data and stuff like that. But certainly, unless there's been heavy rain, you're probably not going to get a 2 o'clock, allowed to burn anyhow. So, I would say if you're going to fall on the side of caution on anything, then definitely do it after 7. But the second thing of that is, if you're hitting times where you're starting to see that you're getting a lot of no burn days, kind of all across the province, then that is going to start continuing until we get a substantial amount of rain. And so, at that point, you can no longer assume that, I'll probably be good after 7, especially if it's a windy night and such like that. So, I really can't advise you to, just assume anything. But, if you're, if you're really kind of stuck, then certainly, yeah, I'm not going to say assume it.
Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft, where we ask the tough questions.
Yeah, and I'm like I'm just trying to think of like a survival fire and stuff like that, and that's kind of really where my thought is going, because like just having a fire, because you're camping and you want to have a fire, like you can't necessarily risk that. So I guess in my mind I was making a few assumptions with that, and really, when the first set of regulations were made back in, I don't know, the 50s, didn't have camp stoves, and they didn't necessarily have the things that they have now, where you can still cook a meal, without having to have a fire. And that's where they kind of came up with the cooking fires and stuff like that. But then, if you are in a survival situation, and your life is going to depend whether you have this fire or not, then definitely, have the fire. Chances are you're going to get spotted very quickly and rescued, and then we can deal with it then. So don't don't feel you have to check the line then. But yeah, it's a safe go-to, just to check that line the whole time.
You had a follow-up there, Ben, I think?
Well, I mean, we've always recommended, and we've always been much more on the side of caution from Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures, and we've recommended a few methods, including the fire bowl, which is actually just a stainless bowl and having the fire contained within that. We've also usually recommend a pretty small fire when you're in the woods camping, regardless of what, if it says fire burn, still keep it small, keep it contained, keep it something you can personally control, because in these situations you are far back there, and it could be a wall before anyone could even get back to help, so the damage could be quite great. So care and good practices are always something that we push. And my question was more like, we always would try to keep it, if you have to have a fire, to a minimum. We do push or encourage people to have cook stoves, small, lightweight things generally, because it works with our philosophy and trying to go back further in the woods. You generally try to have lightweight loads and stuff. But do you have any suggestions on, and maybe I can show, these wood gas stoves? So they're basically a contained stove. And your thoughts on these? Robert might be able to flick me up there for a second.
I was going to say, can we loop back to that once Paul finishes on the fire safe thing, and I can kind of get us all back up on the screen here?
Okay.
Yeah, so the burn safe line, that gets updated every day. If it's gray, it's a no burn time. The big thing keep in mind is that no fires from 8 o'clock until 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the minimum. One of the exception is if you're camping in a campground or in a provincial park. National parks have different rules because they're a different agency. And then in those areas, just because, and we get asked about this all the time. Why are they allowed to have fires during those times? And really, it comes down to their fire pits are designed, for small fires, limited amounts of wood, and they're usually the owners of the park are patrolling and stuff as well. And you kind of contrast that with a homeowner who could potentially have a truckload of pallets, throw them in a big pile and have a fire as well, which certainly creates a lot more danger as well. So and that's why it's kind of allowed at campgrounds. And again, the owner of the campground themselves could also, at the same time say, nope, we're not going to have fires as well. So it's a little bit more policed, and so that's why that kind of exists. And then there are times when there's an out and out fire ban put on. So no fires at all, even in the campgrounds and such like that. And that's different than when you see the map red for a certain county, that's a no burn night. A fire ban is actually something different. The Minister of Natural Resources proclaims a fire ban, and then and then no fires are allowed. The fires in the campground have to be mentioned in the ban to say that they're not going to be allowed in the campground. And that is different. And usually when there's a proclamation that happens, that's going to occur for a longer period of time. And so people say they get start getting no burn nights, and they say there's a fire ban on. And they're actually sort of two different things. So here we're just saying it's not a safe night to burn. We'll look at it tomorrow night, as opposed to a fire ban where we're really kind of looking at, we're into a whole period, and it's going to take a whole lot of rain to actually, make a dent to make everything safe to allow fires again. So they just kind of kill all the fires out there. So that's kind of the difference between them. And then another thing that happens, and it doesn't happen all that often, but it happened in 2016. And then before that, I think it was, I'm going to say 2001 was the last time. Before that, maybe 2002. But they have where they close the woods. So they do a woods closure where you're not allowed to travel in the woods. And again, that's to, cut down on, the amount of machinery working in the woods, the four-wheelers, the people moving around and stuff like that, because now we're really into a critical period in the woods where even organic matter that might build up against a muffler of a four-wheeler and then fall off could start a fire in the woods, or a dozer working and hitting a strike could potentially cause a fire then. So now we're starting to get into very very critical periods when you start to see those things put into place. So, Ben, are you got your stove out there now?
Yeah.
Can you release control of the screen there, Paul, and I'll bring us back into 3? Oh, well, I got Ben and you switched, but I'm not switching those. Anyway, can you see him there, Paul?
Yeah, I can see him.
Are you familiar with these type of stoves?
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
I love them. Yeah.
I like mine too. It folds up pretty small, and it is double walled. It does drop ash out the bottom, and you do have to definitely still take a lot of care and stuff, but it does keep you a pretty contained little fire. And the nice thing is it pretty well heats up, cooks something pretty quick, but shortly after the fire's out, it's cold to touch pretty well. You can pack it up pretty quickly. So there's a great advantages to them. But do they still fall under the same fire ban? Or no fires?
I'm going to say no, because it is an appliance.
Yeah.
And yeah. So the national parks may not allow it, but again, they have different rules because like they wouldn't allow like a charcoal barbecues and stuff like that during some of their fire bans and stuff like that. So I'm going to say they'd be a little dicey with them as well. Myself, I actually when I'm out in the woods, I have a little alcohol burner that does a great little job for warming things up and and cup of tea and stuff like that. So great little things.
So when there is a fire, a no burn day on, I guess then, things like the little alcohol stoves and the butane stoves, just to clarify, those would still be able to be used in the proper conditions, right? Like as long as you're not burying it in the woods floor and trying to light it there, you can still use those without actually breaking the restrictions, because they're not actually considered like a campfire. They may be considered an open fire, but they're not considered like a campfire under the regulations of having no burning, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And so people ask about chimeneas and for backyard burning or some of the other things that are out there. So like propane fire pits are acceptable. Really is it makes reference to CSA approved appliance. So some people say, well, if I get a wood stove and drag it out in my backyard, can I have a fire outside in the wood stove? And it's CSA approved, which the item itself is CSA approved, but it's not hooked up in a CSA approved way. So in that case, you're not just allowed to drag an old stove out and have a fire of that. Again, don't look for the loopholes. Look for what they're trying to do, which is ultimately prevent forest fires. Because if you have a favorite campsite, it's not good if you end up burning it down. So
to that, another one that I've been asked about and I've said no, just to clarify, the old burn barrel with the grate over top of it, not allowed because it's not CSA approved. In the short, you know what I mean?
Yeah, actually, it's not allowed for a number of reasons, and so not CSA approved. And then the other thing is back, and again, I don't have a year, but I'm going to say maybe 10, maybe getting closer to 15 years now. Revisions to the Environment Act and stuff actually makes it illegal to go and burn things that can't be, or that could be recycled and composted and stuff like that. So people taking all their plastic out and burning that, it's actually illegal to do that. They do allow for burning in a barrel for larger twigs and stuff like that. Or like branches, but again, if you enjoy a campfire or somebody that does, there's no reason why that can't be cut up and people enjoy it in a constructed fire pit or something like that when they're allowed to have a fire.
And that's a very good point there. I'm trying to think if there's any other points I wanted to bring up. Was there anything else that you had, Ben? I got to all the notes I had jotted down while Paul was talking. Was there anything else we should finish this note on?
I don't know about a point. I have a couple of curiosity things because I've seen a couple of weird things over the years. What's the strangest thing that stopped a fire that you've seen?
The strangest thing that stopped a fire. Wow. Probably of all the questions I thought I'd be asked tonight, that wasn't one of them.
I seen a guy in a pair of Daisy Dukes and a garden hose put a fire out once. That was one of the strangest things I've ever seen.
You still go to sleep thinking about that, don't you, Robert?
Yeah. Well, you know what? People kind of get inventive. So I've seen somebody, put out a fairly decent fire with a 2-liter bottle of 7 Up. You kind of shake it up and spray it, and just kind of went along the edge of the fire, and yeah, um, yeah. I don't know. You kind of run into some things where it's just kind of like what actually did stop that fire, but you kind of wonder where it is. But sometimes even like a shadow is enough to have kept kept the fire from really kind of taking off or something. Just kind of that little microclimate.
Yeah.
And been on, we had some fires in British Columbia a few years back. They gave us like a couple of fires, and one fire was actually keeping 3 other fires from really kind of taking off. Just it would grow, and then but the smoke column would kind of shade out the other ends, the other fires. So yeah,
There's years ago where I grew up in Newfoundland. There was a pretty big forest fire. It was only a couple of kilometers from my cabin. We walked up after it went out, and there was a tiny walking trail. It was through like a boggish area, so all like blueberry bushes and small thin growth. And there was a walking path that was probably not much more than 6-7 inches across, 1 foot in front of the other. And this huge fire had come up and stopped at that walking path. But it's funny, like it had crossed roads, railroad tracks, a river, no problem, and then stopped at this one little like 6-inch trail. It just, I mean, I know they were hitting it with a water bomber and all that, but that did so kind of surprise me. It's predictable, I guess, in some ways, and surprising in others.
Yeah, and again, when you look at conditions, what else was the conditions? Because potentially the fire spread out, and again a change in humidity or something, and now it's less intense, and it kind of crept up to that walking trail, and couldn't go any further.
Yeah.
Whereas earlier in the day when it was jumping roads, different wind, different humidity, different temperature. And it certainly gave it that energy. So yeah, sometimes even like a shift in the wind, and now it's no longer a head fire. Now it's a backing fire, which is certainly a lot less intense. Yep.
Any other points of interest there, Ben?
I'm sure the ton will come up, but I can't keep the man going all day.
No, that's just it. We are creeping up on an hour and a half, which honestly is not the longest show we've had, believe it or not, Paul.
No.
That's why I wasn't too worried about how long we ran. We do have a knack for running long. Like we always say, our shows are going to be about an hour, and then we stop at about an hour and a half. And between an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half, so we're actually kind of right on cue with where we would normally be with one of our shows.
Yeah, right on.
But yeah, I think good spot to end it right there for tonight. If you don't have any final comments there, Ben, or closing statements or anything like that on your end.
Well, just thank you, Paul, for coming out. It was great information. I enjoyed it. A very interesting topic, and I think there's always a lot of questions on my part, anyways, on fires and how they work, because it's a bit of a passion, but not quite as much, I think, as it has been for you. To spend most of your life. Thank you for coming out and sharing your time and your knowledge.
No problem. Thank you for having me, and I'm more than willing to come back for a follow-up show. So,
and what I can see the follow-up show.
Think about conditions. Think about.
Oh nope. Sorry. Go ahead, Paul. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I can already see how the follow-up show is going to go. You're going to get some questions on burning conditions, and then you made a statement about Ben's little wood stove there. I can see a lot of people are going to be asking, would this be considered an appliance? So the next time this rolls around, you may have a few of those questions roll along, because we've had those comments, you know what I mean? Like, do you think my stove would be okay? So we may have to, for anybody that is interested in that, and I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of different things out there, and once again, it would probably be I don't want to say best guess, but it would be the most educated decision. If you want to send pictures or something like that, or join us on a live show, if you do have a specific appliance or stove like that you'd like us to take a look at, by all means, you can email it to our podcast at atlanticbushcraft.ca, and I will forward it on to Paul, and he will give the most educated opinion on it. I don't want to say the most educated guess or any of that. It'll be the most educated opinion. Because I think it's still going to come down to, like Paul said, don't look for gray areas. And that's kind of what Ben and I have always said. So don't look for gray areas. Try to look at how, by not potentially having the fire, you're going to be benefiting the larger picture, I think is what I'm trying to say. Politically correctly, anyway.
As always,
Yeah,
we say,
at the end of the day,
you guys can flip a coin for whoever wants to go first.
I'll go ahead there, Ben.
I was just say we've always encouraged people to avoid the worst case scenario and practice what they're going to do before they leave, so that they're kind of prepped for it. So if you know the temperature is going to be low and you know the fire index is going to be high, come up with some solutions for temperature and cooking before you leave, and be comfortable with those, because going out there with no real plan and then being forced to have a fire because it's your only option, like our night at the river, we had options, but had we not, we could have got ourselves in a lot of trouble. So things like that. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. We want people to be safe and, follow the rules. And, if you do have something that you're using, if it's controllable, you're doing at a time, that's not the peak fire hazard and stuff, not on windy nights. You're going to be safe, but make sure you do that follow up regardless of what you're using, because even with my alcohol burner, the potential is there, that it could get hot enough, or I've got it in the wrong place, and and now the heat's gone to grass or something like that. So again, look at your site, look at what you're doing, keep things small, and then do the follow up to make sure it's extinguished before you leave the site.
All right. Well, like I said, we are rolling into the hour and a half there, so I guess a good time to shut her down. If anybody has any questions for Paul, as we stated, once again, you can email us at podcast@atlanticbushcraft.ca, and I'll make sure they get forwarded on to Paul. You can visit our website, atlanticbushcraft.ca, and there's a contact us option there, which also links back into our Facebook page. Like I said, anyway you want to get a hold of us, I'll make sure that Paul gets your guys' comments, questions, or anything like that, as long as they're within good taste. I promise I will filter them out, Paul. If anything becomes inappropriate, we'll just dispose of them. But other than that, yeah, I strongly recommend everybody takes a look at the Nova Scotia Burn Safe?
Burn Safe.
Burn Safe website, especially if you're in Nova Scotia. And even if you're not, take a look at it. It is the World Wide Web. You can look at it anywhere. And hopefully some of what Paul talked about here tonight will make a little bit more sense when you look at those numbers and kind of make those decisions. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, Ben, but I know Paul probably does this. I look around the country and look at their burn conditions and how they're rating stuff and things like that too, just out of a general interest sometimes. Actually, it's Paul that got me into it, so I know he does it. But yeah, it's all good information, and the whole point of all of this was to hopefully help you guys understand what a safe burn is and why they put some of the restrictions into place, because we do get, a fair amount of that, I don't want to say lashback, but a fair amount of those comments when there is some sort of restriction in place as to why they're doing it. So, once again, thank you very much for joining us here tonight, Paul. It was very much appreciated. A lot of good information there. Once again, our listeners that are listening audio only, be sure to jump on YouTube, check out this video and a few other of the podcasting mediums there that allow videos, and look at what was being talked about, because there was a ton of good information there.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night, everybody.